Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we try to boil down a whole stack of sources, give you that shortcut to getting up to speed. Today, we're jumping into something pretty complex. It's right at that crossroads of, well, technology, justice, and, frankly, human freedom. We're looking at how algorithms are increasingly making these huge real-world decisions, and specifically, what happens when code and algorithm decides if someone stays in prison or gets released. This deep dive, it focuses on a really controversial new law down in Louisiana involving a risk tool called Tiger.
Right, and what we're aiming for here is to really dig into these sources you sent over, pull out the core findings on this specific Louisiana case, because it really is a powerful example, a shortcut, you could say, to understanding how tech, law, and actual human lives intersect. Sometimes in, well, pretty surprising ways, you'll find some unexpected facts in here.
Yeah, definitely. And to make it real, let's start with the person. Calvin Alexander.
Okay.
Picture this. He's 70 years old, nearly blind, uses a wheelchair. By all accounts, he's been working really hard on rehabilitation, anger management, learning a trade, drug treatment, plus a clean disciplinary record while inside. He was serving a 20-year sentence for drug charges more than halfway through. He was really counting on a parole hearing scheduled for September. His daughter was even getting a room ready for him. She'd only recently reconnected with him, too.
But then things took a sharp turn. Just 2 months before that hearing. Gone. He gets a letter. Basically says he's no longer eligible for parole. And the reason, this computerized system, Tiger, flagged him as a moderate risk to reoffend. And here's the kicker. With the new law, if you get that moderate or high-risk rating, you don't even get to go before the parole board. You just can't. We're talking about roughly 13,000 people, according to the State's Department of Corrections. That's almost half the prison population with these ratings. Now, not all are parole eligible yet, but still. Alexander himself, he used the word betrayed, said people in jail have lost hope. You can imagine.
Wow. 13,000 people. That's staggering. And his story, Calvin Alexander's, it's not just some random fluke, is it? It ties directly into these new laws pushed by the governor, Jeff Landry. He's got that tough on crime stance, right? I mean, his background as former police officer, sheriff's deputy, made it a big campaign point, cracking down on early release, calling it a revolving door.
Exactly. And if we zoom out a bit, his situation slots right into this larger picture. Two big legal changes happened. First, for crimes committed after August 1st of this year, parole is pretty much gone for almost everyone. That makes Louisiana the 17th state to abolish it, and the first one to do it in 24 years.
Whoa.
Yeah. But then there's a second part, which affects people already in prison, like Alexander. A different law basically handed the keys to the tighter algorithm for parole eligibility. And here's the crucial bit. Only people rated low risk can even get a parole hearing now.
Only low risk.
Only low risk. Yeah. And according to, well, about 7 national criminal justice experts we looked at in the sources, Louisiana is unique here. It's the only state using risk scores to automatically disqualify huge chunks of the prison population from even being considered for parole.
Okay, so let's talk about Tiger itself. Targeted interventions to greater enhance reentry. It was developed, about 10 years ago, with federal money, LSU researchers involved. But here's the part that really jumped out at me from the sources. Its creators didn't design it to keep people in prison longer. They actually saw it as a tool for rehabilitation, like figuring out who needed what programs, counseling, classes to stop them reoffending.
Yeah, that contrast is really stark, isn't it? One of the creators, Keith Nordyke, is quoted saying its whole purpose was to slow down the revolving door. How? By targeting services, addiction counseling, job training at the high-risk folks. Now, corrections officials did start looking at Tiger scores for parole back in 2018, but it wasn't the only thing until this new law in 2024. Now it's the gatekeeper.
So it went from a guide for services to the final word on release for many.
Pretty much. Which definitely raises the question, how does this current use stack up against what it was, originally built for?
And this leads to what seems like the most troubling part based on these readings. The Tiger score, as it's used now, completely ignores anything a prisoner does to rehabilitate while incarcerated.
Right.
It's all based on past stuff, things they can't change. So, what does that actually mean for someone genuinely trying to turn things around? And what factors are being used then?
You nailed it. It doesn't factor in good behavior, programs completed, none of that. Instead, Tiger looks at these immutable factors, things like the crimes they committed way back when, their work history before prison, how old they were at their first arrest, even things like old marijuana convictions or if they had parole revoked in the past. Things set in stone.
Wow.
And the experts we look at, they generally agree. Algorithms like Tiger, They could be okay at predicting trends for a group, like maybe 40 out of 100 people with similar factors might reoffend. But they're really bad at telling you which specific 40 people those will be.
Right, the individual level prediction is the problem.
Exactly. It's predicting populations, not people. And this leads directly into the bias concerns. Many criminal justice scholars argue that relying so heavily on these unchangeable past facts, it just inherently disadvantages people from poorer, often racially segregated communities.
How so?
We'll take prior drug convictions, for example. An economist, Megan Stevenson, points out black people and white people use drugs at similar rates, right? But black people get arrested and convicted way more often, largely due to, well, heavier policing in their neighborhoods.
Okay.
So if your algorithm weights prior drug convictions heavily, Stevenson concludes it becomes a biased algorithm to make biased decisions. And just for context, black people make up nearly 2/3 of Louisiana's prison population, but only about 1/3 of the state's overall population.
That disparity is huge.
It is. And then there's the socioeconomic angle. Tiger uses past employment history. So if you come from a low-income area with fewer job opportunities, you're automatically starting behind someone from a wealthier background, just based on that data point. Essentially, the sources argue it implies poorer people are less eligible for parole than wealthier people.
So, based on these arguments, Tiger isn't just potentially inaccurate for individuals. It sounds like critics are saying it actively reinforces existing inequalities. Is there any pushback on that in the sources? Does the state see it differently?
The consensus among the experts cited leans heavily towards these biases being baked in, because of the data it uses and how it weighs it. And this ties right into some serious legal questions, too, constitutional ones. Several legal scholars think this whole setup in Louisiana might violate the U.S. Constitution. The part that bans laws that retroactively make a punishment more severe, ex post facto laws. Professor Sanjay Starr explains that the chance for parole has usually been seen as, like, part of the original sentence calculation. So if you suddenly tie eligibility to a score that someone can't improve through good behavior, Starr argues that looks a lot like making the sentence harsher after the fact.
That's a really interesting legal argument. The idea that changing parole rules after sentencing is like changing the sentence itself. But couldn't the state just say parole is a privilege, not a right, so they can change the rules? What's the counter argument there?
That's often the debate, privilege versus right. But the scholar's point is more nuanced. Even if granting parole was discretionary, the opportunity to be considered was part of the system when they were sentenced. Removing that opportunity based on an unchangeable score calculated later, that's where the constitutional concern lies. It arguably changes the nature of the punishment. And this frustration, it really echoes what former parole board members in Louisiana are saying.
Oh, they've spoken out.
Yeah, Keith Jones, who was on the board from 2018 to 2020, he put it bluntly. He said, it doesn't make much sense to me that a score generated by a process that the inmate has no control over takes away the authority and the power of the parole board. Why have a parole board?
Good question.
Right. And others, like Tony Marabella, a former judge who also served, he emphasized that they used to look closely at an inmate's record inside. Disciplinary issues, programs completed, support from staff, or even victims. Marabella said he cared more about what they had accomplished than just some risk score. They all stressed that before this new law, Tiger was just, one piece of information they considered, not the whole puzzle.
Okay, let's make this concrete. You mentioned a contrast earlier. Alonzo Allen, he got paroled back in 2021, before this law changed everything, and he had the same Tiger score as Calvin Alexander, and a similar history.
Exactly the same moderate risk score. Allen had a 40-year sentence from 2012, drug charges, gun charge. He also had, disciplinary write-ups in prison, and importantly, 2 previous parole revocations. So not a perfect record on paper, which explains the score.
But his hearing went differently. What happened there? I remember reading the warden actually spoke up for him.
That's right. The warden, Jerry Goodwin, stood up and really praised Allen, talked about how hard he'd worked on his addictions, communication skills, and pointed out that Allen took classes even when he didn't need them for good time credits. He was genuinely trying.
And the board responded to that.
They did. There was this really key exchange. A board member actually challenged the Tiger score directly. Asked Allen, is it possible that this instrument might be wrong? You think you are rehabilitated to the point where you can prove that assessment wrong?
Wow.
And Allen's answer was firm.
Yes, sir. Very much, sir. I do think that is wrong. After hearing the warden, hearing Allen, the board voted unanimously to parole him.
How's he doing now? That was 2021. The sources say Allen, who's 61 now, he's been sober, working full-time as a truck driver. And crucially, no parole violations in almost 4 years. He said, God has been good.
So it's a stark contrast. Same score, similar history, totally different outcomes, just based on when their hearing fell relative to this law change, really highlights the impact of policy.
Absolutely. And it brings us to the wider effects of this law. Proponents like State Senator Patrick McMath, they argued it would make things more efficient and effective, clear backlogs. But the parole board's own data shows something else. The number of hearings actually decreased by 40% between 2016 and 2023, even before this latest law.
So the efficiency argument doesn't quite hold up based on that data.
It seems not.
Right.
And the impact since the law did take effect is pretty dramatic. The average number of people getting paroled each month, it dropped from about 32 in 2023 to just 6 per month after August 2024.
6, down from 32.
6. And between August 1st and mid-December last year, at least 70 scheduled parole hearings were just canceled, including Calvin Alexander's, all because the Tiger score wasn't low risk.
And what are the concerns moving forward? Opponents of the law must be worried about the consequences.
They definitely are. They predict, the prison population is going to swell, which means huge costs for taxpayers, potentially billions for new prisons, and also concerns about safety inside prisons. If inmates feel like good behavior and rehabilitation don't matter for release.
The incentive to participate drops off.
Right. Could lead to more hopelessness, maybe more violence. And, well, it circles right back to Calvin Alexander. Unlike Alonzo Allen, he won't get that chance to face the board, to show them his progress, his clean record inside. His family is worried. His health is declining. He's diabetic, poor circulation, only one eye. They feel he might not even live the 5 years left on his sentence. And Alexander's own words really stick with you. They told me once I received my risk score, there is nothing I can do to change it. It's like walking into a brick wall.
Walking into a brick wall. Yeah, that perfectly captures that feeling of just futility, doesn't it? Especially when you believe you've done everything asked of you. And that really sums up the tension here, I think. This promise of algorithm efficiency clashing head-on with these deeply personal stories of justice, change, and, well, hope for a second chance. What we've seen in this deep dive is how one tool, Tiger, built for one thing rehabilitation support, gets repurposed and suddenly holds immense power over people's lives, raising huge questions about fairness, bias, even constitutional rights.
It really does. And it makes you think, doesn't it, about how often we're encountering these kinds of data-driven tools elsewhere. Credit scores, hiring algorithms. Are they creating similar hidden brick walls? Based on things from our past we can't change. It forces us to ask, what's our responsibility here? How do we make sure these systems are actually promoting justice and not just, a cold kind of efficiency? It's a fundamental question. How do we balance that desire for prediction and smooth processes with the very human need for agency, for growth, and ultimately the chance to show you've changed?